Hey, what's up, and welcome back to the Relationship School's Smart Couple podcast. Have you pre-ordered or ordered your Smart Couple quotebook yet? Go to relationshipschool.net/smart couple, and it'll take you right there. Looking forward to hearing from you after you dive in and chew on that. If you're new, welcome. This podcast is all about growth and development through the vehicle of long-term relationship. In other words, if you want to have a great marriage, then you work on yourself. You stare the man or woman in the mirror down and you learn how to embrace her or him more and love that person. That's going to get you a really good relationship. And you do that through you don't wait until you, quote, love yourself, some finish line thing. You do that now. Wherever you're at in your relationship life, single, divorced, together with someone, frustrated, happy, you just keep staring yourself in the face and working on yourself and learning about you and learning about this person or that future person. And then you earn a wonderful, beautiful relationship over time. So we are in that conversation. If that's you, if that's of interest to you, you're in the right place. We interview couples, we interview relationship experts, interpersonal neurobiologists, neuroscientists, scientists, sexperts, average people. We interview all kinds of people, and we have fun here. And we learn about ourselves. So this is where you want to plant yourself if you're in that kind of conversation, all right? Now, if you want to get more support than this podcast can offer, and you want to meet like-minded growth development oriented beings, then you join the Relationship School Roots community. You go to relationshipschool.net/roots to apply and come hang out with us where we meet every couple of weeks, right? And practice these kind of tools. Awesome. See you in there. Okay, in this interview, I've got a psychotherapist who's been at this for 30 years. And her name's Sharon Stanley. She lives up in Bainbridge Island, Washington, and she's studied with Alan Shore, Peter Levine, and she is all about helping you with relational trauma. And she trains psychotherapists, and she sees people in private practice, and she's just a really experienced clinician, especially around trauma. Okay. So in this interview, we get into the conversation around trauma as it pertains to us adults in relationship and in partnership. And I think you're going to really dig this because it's like in the vein of these interviews with Stephen Porges, Bonnie Badenoch, Stan Tatkin, where we talk about trauma, Pat Ogden. So if you like those types of interviews, it's going to be about that. And if you're a client who has experienced trauma and you go see a trauma therapist, for example, this conversation is going to be really interesting for you. Basically, we get into how impactful trauma is on our adult relationships and our lives and our health, and what we can do to learn to heal trauma inside of ourselves so we can have more fulfilling relationships and a more fulfilling life. Okay? So, we'll include her bio in the show notes, but basically she's worked with suicidal teens. She has worked with veterans. She's worked with families. She studied in her doctoral program, and she got a PhD in British Columbia in '94. She studied somatic experiencing, which is known as SE, with Peter Levine, the founder of that body of work. She studied with First Nations people in British Columbia, and again, worked with a lot of PTSD. And so anyway, this woman's got a lot of experience here, and I'm psyched to introduce you to her. So let's do it. All right, welcome Sharon Stanley.
Thank you, Jayson. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have you and your wisdom and time here. Will you tell the listener just a little bit about who you are and what you're up to right now?
I'd be glad to. I'm a clinical psychologist. I practice on Bainbridge Island, Washington, half-time, and the other half-time I train psychotherapists to work with trauma.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, been doing training for approximately 20 years in field of trauma and relationships, particularly about relationship trauma.
Yeah, cool. I'm so psyched. That's what I want to talk about today. And I noticed you've studied with Alan Shore and Peter Levine, and clearly have a ton of experience here, interpersonal neurobiology. So I want to get into that, and I'm just curious, just biographically, to hear a little bit more about you. First of all, married, kids, divorced, no kids, that kind of thing would be helpful for the listener.
Yeah, I was married for 25 years. I have 4 children. All of my children are parents and 8 grandchildren, seven
Wow.
sons and a granddaughter, 3 sons and a daughter. So I have a tribe that I belong
Wow. That's so cool. That's awesome. All right. And how did you, just a little short story on how you got into working with trauma and relational trauma and being a psychotherapist? I'm so curious to how you got into that.
Yeah, I think I knew that trauma was at the root of some experiences I had when I was growing up, particularly in college. And it wasn't until my younger sister was brutally attacked that I really recognized that this word trauma applied. At that time, I was working at a mental health clinic, working with suicidal teens. And one of the things I recognized too is that the suicidal teens were children of veterans that were coming back from war, from
Mm,
Vietnam. So there were just a number of things, historically experiences that could only be explained with the understanding that I got around trauma. And
yeah.
so the number of these different experiences accumulated. And 1990, I went up to the University of Victoria and started studying what could be done for children who had had trauma, particularly these children who were committing suicide or attempting suicide. And so I spent a number of years in British Columbia and came up with the foundations of the work that I'm doing now in my doctoral work.
Mm, beautiful. What I'm so curious. Clearly, there was a link that you noticed between veterans and the environment, the home environment, perhaps that the kids grew up in, right? What is that about? Like, if we grow up in a stressful environment, for example, or an under-resourced parent, what starts to happen to the child, I guess?
One of the things I did is I often, when I was working at the mental health clinic, held workshops for these children so I could listen to them. We'd gather them in groups. And because these children had a difficult time talking about their experience, they would draw it. And they would
Mm,
often draw the picture of a broken heart and a loneliness. And they would report that there was no one that could feel what they felt inside them. And that's what I really started to get curious about, is that I'd been trained as a psychotherapist and I'd learned a fair amount about empathy, but I was learning from these children, they wanted other people to feel what they felt rather than just to understand or to see them. They
mm,
needed somebody to be connected to them in in a really attuned, resonant way. And
yeah.
that seemed really important to these children. And so that's what I went to University of Victoria to study, was how adults developed an empathic connection with each other and with children. And what I realized as I moved along with this is that adults who had any kind of trauma themselves had lost the ability to stay in an empathic connection.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so okay. And so what do you, and then if we fast forward to today,
Yeah.
all the work you're doing now, I'm assuming it's similar. How is it different, and what are you noticing now, and how has the
Well,
work changed?
probably much more fine tuned. I think one of the things I've recognized is that people need to be embodied to be able to be empathic. And that sense of being able to be embodied and to be able to be aware of one's own feeling at any given set of circumstances at any time, that ability then translates directly into an empathic connection within the self and with others, within the environment. So, so the work of empathy feels like it's become much more expansive than just seeing or hearing another from another's point of view. It's a being with the other at a very deep,
Hmm.
tuning in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, in my interview with Dan Siegel and Gabor Mate, they talk about the presence, like our ability to be present there with someone is really where the healing of trauma occurs. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I really liked when I'm working with clinicians to be very specific about what it means to be present, to be attuned, to be embodied with another, and
Yeah,
how,
what is that?
yeah.
Explain that a little bit for us. Like,
Well,
what is this presence and being a tuning fork and attuned to someone?
I think if we go back and we look at the very early ways that an infant communicates with a caregiver, we've got three primary modalities. We've got the eye contact, we've got the prosody, the tone of voice, and we've got gesture and touch. We've got these three primary ways of connecting. And if clinicians can really attune the way they gaze, the way that they see, what they see in another person, how they can really click into skin tone, muscles, facial movements, posture, and immediately kind of tune in to the gaze and communicate what they see with the gaze.
Hmm.
And the same with the intonation of the voice. With trauma, we actually lose the ability to hear certain frequencies, and those frequencies are critically important to communicate emotion. And so, if I've been traumatized, those muscles are either flaccid or hypo alert and are not picking up the subtleties of emotion that necessary to be able to have an empathic attunement. And so,
Hmm.
really working with the voice, working with the ears, working with music, working with sound, working with the visual, and then working with the internal sense of touch, of what it feels like in the muscles of the striated muscles, the muscles of the viscera that are smooth muscles, and really tuning in any given moment to what my experience is, both externally and internally, so that I can attune to the other's experience. So, working with those three primary modes of communication and really what I find is that it's almost limitless of what we can do in terms of being conscious and aware on those levels.
Yeah, and so are you saying, like, if we back up a little bit and explain trauma, it's a like, would you explain trauma and then why what you're suggesting is so healing?
Well, you know, in trauma, the word has so much attached to it. There's traumatic events, but the way I like to think of trauma is the residue of those experiences in the body. And they're primarily in the brainstem, in the autonomic nervous system. And in that autonomic nervous system after trauma, the individual never really feels safe. And so that sense of being able to be connected and attuned to another person is radically important for the primary sense of safety before you do any kind of intervention at all. So to be able to feel safe inside myself is
Hmm.
essential before I can even regulate my own emotions or autonomic nervous system.
So, okay, so then when you talk about, like, in the psychotherapeutic process, someone who's working with a client who has trauma, you're saying these three ways of basically getting present and attuning and feeling resonance helps the client feel safe enough
Yes.
to then feel their experience, which is the healing of the trauma.
Exactly, but the clinician has to be coming from a place of using Porges' language, the ventral vagal or the social engagement system,
Totally.
very
Yeah.
regulated. I like to call it the optimal level of arousal, where we're
Yeah.
coming into sympathetic arousal and we've not dropped into hypoarousal. But if the clinician can stay in that realm, in that optimal arousal zone, then the traumatized person has the opportunity to experience that with them. It's an agreement that happens.
Yeah, I'm guessing like if I want to just kind of bridge this over to an intimate relationship where so many people struggle and where my listener is hanging out is wondering, okay, I get triggered in my client, like when we think of adult attachment relationships now, and some of the work of Porges and Stan Tacken and others, and Dan Siegel, there's this way in which we can actually be that for each other, right? But if you trigger me, that's going to be hard for me to stay in a ventral place and be this sort of safe resource for you. I'm going to be now activated, and your body's going to sense that I'm like dysregulated, and it's going to be really hard. So what just to build a bridge, it's like one thing to have this in a contained environment of like resource therapist and client who's got some trauma. It's a whole nother steeper curve, it seems to me, to do this partner to partner. Would you agree? Or
Oh, totally. That's the challenge. And
yeah.
how do we first of all develop an allied relationship with our partner so that they can experience their own activation and we can stay in an optimal arousal level. And
Yeah.
that's the challenge. I think that comes, first of all, there's a self-responsibility. I need to be accountable for strengthening my ventral vagal tone. And in strengthening that tone, then I become less vulnerable to that sympathetic arousal, that activation. So how do I at the same time strengthen my own ventral vagal tone, but also be able to just simply acknowledge I'm activated now and I need to be able to regulate before we're going to be able to move on and be able to do some kind of connection, some kind of resolution.
Yeah. Let's back up a step. For the layperson, ventral vagal tone, I'm with you. I understand what that term means, but what's a practical way of saying, how do I strengthen what? What is it I'm trying to strengthen? What's another way of saying ventral vagal tone?
Another way of strengthening that is if we're looking at Porges' work on the polyvagal theory.
Yeah.
Porges basically is affirming the strength of the myelinated vagal system, the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the lungs, the heart, the throat, that all of these regions, these muscles, these areas of the body are on one circuit, and that's the ventral vagal. And it's a myelinated circuit. It moves quickly and it moves fast. So as I strengthen these areas of response, visual, gazing, my auditory hearing, my connectivity with my orbital frontal cortex and my heart, as I do this, and I think we can do a lot of that in meditation practices, somatic meditation. We can take a lot of accountability for our own development of the myelinated vagal system that actually puts the brake on sympathetic arousal, on our
Okay. So I want to simplify just another step. So if I hear you right, another way of saying that is I could strengthen, it's only going to help my partnership if I can strengthen this vagal tone, which might mean getting more resilient and almost like self-attuned with my tone of voice, my facial expressions, more self-aware, more mindful perhaps of how I am in my body when I'm with someone else. Like the more I can get aware there, I might get a little stronger with the capacity to be with sensory experience and upset. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Exactly, that we can
Okay.
practice that, just like any skill. It's a skill
Yeah.
of building that tonicity, that just like you would build the tonicity of your muscles to play basketball or to play tennis. The muscles of the face, the throat, the heart, all can come up to a tonicity that we are much more able to stay in this optimal arousal zone when even our partner is activated and be able to hold that space for them. And I think that's how we can support each other in our relationships and work through the trauma that we all carry.
Totally. And let's say my arousal is too steep because I have PTSD or something from a really traumatic event or a series of chronic traumas like war. Now, it's just maybe say too hard for me to do that. I don't even know what you're talking about. Is it probably best for me to go see a psychotherapist to like get myself more okay in my own body so that I can do more mindfulness practices
I
and be
think
more
that's an
self-aware?
option. I think one of the things I like to work with is inviting couples to come in together and to be able to work with one and work with their activation and teach the other one at the same time how to hold the space.
Yeah.
So that they can model what I'm doing in holding the space for their partner. And then after one person has started to regulate their activation, then moving over and working with the other person so that there's this definite sense of I can be an ally for you, but I also can be an embodied witness and
Hmm.
hold the space for you while you work through your trauma. And I can work on regulating myself while you're working through your trauma.
Yeah. And I'm going to have to like you and respect you and not be completely annoyed and blown out by you in order to do that, right?
And that's where I have couples when they want to do this kind of work. It's about growth and development, and it's about developing actually a contract or a covenant is probably a better word of what kinds of things they will agree to while they're doing this allied trauma work.
Yeah. How important is it for the couple to go do their own trauma work versus try to heal it all in the relationship or do it all on their own? Like how important is it that each partner, if there's a lot of trauma in the system, let's say that kind of gets surfaced, someone that might say, yeah, I'm fine, I don't have any trauma, but turns out they're locking horns all the time and fighting all the time, and there's clearly some childhood trauma there. How important is it to go deal with that on their own?
I think that's a question that every couple has to come to. I think what I've seen is an enormous amount of intimacy and growth and bonding that happens when they work through it together with the guidance of a therapist that knows how to do this work, this kind
Hmm.
of,
Yeah,
and,
cool.
um, and that it creates to heal these breaches and to know what the source of these breaches has been um, is transformational for a couple.
Yeah, it really is, right?
Yeah,
So powerful.
it is so powerful. Yeah,
Yeah, it's beautiful to
and
witness
for their
too.
children, for their families.
Yeah. Yo, quick interruption from our sponsor, the Relationship School. The 9-month class that you didn't get in college or high school is coming back for more. Starting in January, that's right, we're enrolling another round. Do you ever feel like you don't have anyone in your life that you can actually relate to and be honest with about your relationship challenges? Do you feel a longing to be seen and known and gotten by other people? Well, if so, for example, we just finished our class on feedback, how to give and receive feedback here at the school. This is a vital skill that goes way beyond a work environment. The power of giving someone feedback is to challenge and support them into becoming who they are more fully and effectively. And when was the last time you got some honest reflections from other people? Okay, we do this here at the Relationship School. So if you want to come hang out with us for 9 months and go all in on getting this part of your life dialed in and getting more effective and more confident in yourself at relationship, then come hang out with us at relationshipschool.net/DPIR. And if you're deadly serious and you want to learn how to help others with their relationship challenges and you want to become a relationship coach, then come join us for our free intro class tomorrow, Thursday, November 16th. Go to relationshipschool.net/be a coach if you want to check out our coaching program. Okay, back to Sharon Stanley. What's the cost when we don't deal with the trauma to, say, our families? What's the cost to you?
Well, I think I've been fascinated by multi-generational trauma and how that's passed down epigenetically, and it's passed down in the attachment processes, and it's passed down in the environment. And the ACEs research shows us very clearly the cost is serious physical and mental illness.
Yeah.
And disturbed communities. It's not just within the individual; it's in the family, it's in the community, and we all suffer when one person has trauma and
Yeah.
has to deal with it.
Yeah. And we see it every day, right? On the news, we're just seeing it's just the world is how people are acting and behaving. And it's like trauma, right?
Exactly, and we share in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay. So what's, I guess just another, a tip for a couple. How does one know if they're dealing with trauma, I guess? Because some people will claim like, well, no, I don't have any trauma. I had a great family and my partner's just kind of annoying sometimes. Like, what's the difference between that and like trauma, knowing if you have trauma?
That's a great question. I think I think you really don't know whether you have trauma or not until you start to notice what's happening in the internal world, particularly the world of sensation, the world of our perception. So if our perception is simply this other person is annoying, what happens in me when I hear that which I'm considering annoying? Is it
Hmm.
the sound of their voice? Is it the kind of comments they're making about me? Is it some habit what happens inside me? And if what happens inside me is difficult for me to regulate in the moment, if I stay irritated, if I stay uh, angry, then I know I'm not able to regulate. And that's the primary indicator that I've got trauma is I'm not able
Mm.
to, in a few moments, regulate my autonomic nervous system and come back to seeing the other person as another human being with their failures as well as my own failures.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. I'm glad you said that. That seems really resonant for me. So listener, if you're listening, that's probably you, because that's most people.
Exactly.
Right? It's
And
pretty hard to stay present and in my body if I'm pretty upset.
that's right.
It's kind of hard to do that.
And how do we, if we're both getting upset and we're not being able to be present, how do we agree to work with that to be able to come back into a place where we are grateful for each other, we're connected to each other, we're really willing to listen to how we're creating an enactment, how we're reenacting something from our past. And
Yeah.
I think that's the question. Every time I'm irritated with my partner, how do I ask that question? What am I reenacting in this moment? What
Mm-hmm.
part
Ooh,
of
great
me
question.
needs to what part of me needs to come up and be explored?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it's possible to have this kind of brings up a question for me. Do you think it's possible to have a mutually satisfying relationship if I don't work on that?
Well, maybe if you have a secure attachment, two of you, and it's been somewhat idealistic, maybe, but I don't see a lot of growth and development when I encounter that kind of relationship. I think it takes a lot of work and daily work
Yeah.
if you're interested in growth and development, and if you're interested in the kind of satisfaction that comes with growth and development. Other people can be happy with satisfactions that come externally.
Yeah.
And so, what is it you want out of
Yeah.
life?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, okay. Let me back up again and talk about the other kind of trauma that people don't think is trauma, that then shows up in adult relationship, maybe as someone who's maybe avoiding, or the avoidant partner, which is neglect. Will you say something about, because if it's like, no, I had a great childhood, my parents never hit me, they never raised their voice at me, but I pretty much was just in my room by myself all the time. Um, or I just went outside and I just played by myself, or like we have signs of neglect, and then that's actually deeply impactful. I know that from my own experience and from the countless people I've interviewed. So will you say just your take on childhood neglect and how that can show up later and its relationship to trauma?
I think that what I've seen over and over again in the avoidant attachment in childhood emotional neglect is a movement over to making sense out of reality with left hemisphere processes. And if we can come out of the logic and the sequence and the abstractions and the vagueness, kind of what you're talking about, Mary Main would call the dissociative gaps. We don't have the emotion, the feeling, the body-centered awareness, the images that come when we're working with the right hemisphere. So I really see the left hemisphere reliance on figuring it all out to be a real indicator of the avoidant attachment. And if we can invite those people over little at a time to start to feel themselves and to feel with the other, then we start to open up a whole new developmental sequence that back to maybe the experiences of early emotional neglect as early as 2-3 months, where the child was left alone and not given the nurturing, holding, and connecting, the eye gaze, the verbal, and the connection, the touch that they needed. And that's what's needed for emotional connection, is the body-to-body connection. That's why I love to bring everything right back to what am I feeling in this moment.
Yeah. So are you saying, I think you're saying neglect is trauma.
Neglect is trauma. In fact, Alan Shore says it's the most serious form of trauma we have.
Yeah, I've heard that as well before.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, it's because it separates us. We're
Yeah.
alone, we're isolated, we're alienated. And the primary need of a human being is to be connected and to another human connection. And it's a denial of our fundamental humanity.
Yeah. And then that's so amazing. That's powerful. So then I'm an adult and I'm, quote, comfortable in my sort of isolation, right? But I'm actually not. Like, I'm actually feeling kind of a low-grade chronic stress probably all the time.
And I'll start to have illnesses and symptoms as I get older, because that low grade stress is creating the adrenaline and cortisol in the system that's continually depleting the health.
Totally. Do you think this rise in autoimmune diseases and just so many illnesses now is a relational trauma specific issue?
It is. I think the work of ACEs has really fundamentally shown that tie.
Help us understand, what's ACEs again? You've mentioned that twice.
Adverse childhood events,
right.
Experiences. And in our community, Kitsap County and Pierce County, we're doing a lot of initiatives of bringing this kind of research into the schools, with parents on a community level, to understand how these fundamental relational traumas are affecting us as a community.
Yeah.
And I think that research, ACEs research, is particularly available for educational processes, particularly because it shows the link between illnesses and early experiences.
Yeah. So it's so powerful, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, when I think of my own body and my own health, for example, it's all ties back to relational stuff.
And I think then these relational things that come down genetically, come down epigenetically from our ancestors, the multi-generational. I really traced a lot of those immune disorders as they've appeared in our own family.
Yeah.
As I've experienced them. And I think trauma is our number one medical and mental illness crisis today.
Yeah. I would add the word relational right in front of that, and I'm totally with you.
I would. But you know what? I think all trauma is relational. I don't think, some people have tried to separate it, the shock trauma and adverse events, but it's all about relationship. And relationship's all about empathy.
Yeah.
So when we come right down to it, how are we empathically connected with ourselves and compassionately connected with ourselves and others?
Yeah. You're speaking my language, Sharon. Well, as we wind down here, this has been great. I know we could go, deeper even and keep going for a while. I have more questions. What, well, let me, because of this is like, let's say this is the collective issue, right? Is this relational trauma thing that's, if we could handle that and figure that out, the world would just simply be a better place, right?
Well, I agree with you. I do have a book that came out last year by Routledge, and it's being used in universities for training people to work with relational trauma. And it's
Great.
called
What's it called?
Relational and Body-Centered Practices for Healing Trauma, Lifting the Burdens of
Great.
the Past. And what I come up with it's been 30 years of practice of working with relational trauma, is 6 basic practices that therapists, couples can use to work through trauma, and lots of strategies in the appendix. So we can work through it, but we need to work through it in a consistent, I think, progressive way that connects with human growth and development. So we're restoring growth and development in those processes.
Yeah, beautiful. Do you have a short synopsis somewhere of the 6? If someone was not ready to buy the book, is there, can you mention a couple of them right now, and we can just put a link to the book in the show notes?
Well, and one builds on the other. The first I really discovered is we have to be embodied if we want to be in relationship. And if we
Yeah.
want to heal relational trauma, we have to really work at embodiment all the time. I learned from working with indigenous cultures that that's part of the culture. Our culture is not embodied.
Right.
And
Totally.
cultural experience to embody. And then as we embody, we can start to tune into more subtle sensory awareness of what's going on, particularly in our brainstem, in our muscles, in our activation, in our quiet, in our calm, and really pick up those signals much more quickly. And when we develop, it's like a language. And then when we develop that, then we can go into empathic connection. And the empathic connection then, and these 3 areas, embodiment, awareness, empathic connection, are internal. And they're my responsibility when I'm in relationship with you. And then I've developed a methodology, a phenomenological inquiry that couples can use, that individuals can use to inquire about trauma, where we go gently into it. And in that inquiry, beginning to let go of the holding, the breaches, the disconnections as we go. So this inquiry process that's built on phenomenological methodology, and then the use of somatic interventions, strategies, techniques to be able to work with the trauma when we have approached it, when we're right there with it. And then once we've kind of worked through the necessary somatic interventions, then reflecting on, this is what we've done, and this is where we are now. So we're continually kind of reflecting on this right hemisphere processing of our experience.
Yeah, cool. Wow. I mean, I'm intrigued. I want to get the book myself. Yeah, it sounds really beautiful with all that experience you have. So a final kind of wrap up question where I want to ask you for feedback, which is, I started this relationship school because I'm on a mission to get this type of information, even interpersonal neurobiology, to young people, parents, and reach a lot of teens and young adults who simply, you never had a class in high school or college, probably. I certainly didn't, on how to do romantic relationships well and how to deal with each other basically in a relationship, right? So I'm on a mission to help people get that information, which is partly why I'm interviewing you, right? So if you were to like whisper in my ear as sort of a mentor, and I could only teach one thing that you, out of all your wisdom, only one thing could get imparted to these young people, what do you think that would be? Like, what's the one thing that you would teach kids if you could only teach one thing?
I think if you could simply teach them to be empathic, first of all, with themselves, which is a way of knowing themselves, and bring compassion to what they know in their own experience. If I can experience that in myself, I'll have that for you.
Beautiful. Thanks. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, and Sharon, I'm going to take that with me. Where can people find you and your book?
My book, Sharon Stanley, you go into Amazon, or Routledge has it for sale. Again, Relational Body-Centered Practices for Healing Trauma. And I'm on Bainbridge Island. The work I do is called Somatic Transformation. And it's about transforming these disturbed relational practices into healthy relational connections.
Great. And it's somatictransformation.com.
.com. You've got it.
Okay. Cool. We'll put that in the show notes along with the link to your book. And I just thank you so much for all the gold you've mined from your years of experience in helping us today.
Thank you very much for connecting, Jayson. And good luck with your relationship school.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, Sharon Stanley, go check out her work, please. I'm going to order that book myself. And it's somatictransformation.com, where you can find out about her, okay? And just really sweet woman with loads of wisdom. One thing I'm taking away myself is it's like the degree to which I'm embodied is the degree to which I can connect, probably, with you. So I want you to, your action step today is to go get feedback from 3 friends on how embodied you are. If you find yourself disembodied frequently, or dissociated or disconnected from yourself, that's going to translate into a lot of relational challenges. So you might just get an honest mirror through 3 of your closest friends and say, hey, hey guys, how embodied do you think I am? Because this was her first step in sort of healing trauma, is get in your body, be there. And it's so essential. It's essential for a good sex life. It's essential for a good heart connection with your husband or wife or partner. It's essential for parenting. It's essential for just living a fulfilling life, is being there, being present and in your body. It's a big deal. Okay. So do that one, check that one out. And if you, a couple other ideas for you, if you're wanting community, because maybe you don't have those 3 friends that will be that honest, I suggest you get involved in the relationship school. Okay. Relationshipschool.net/roots is the place to start, and to start to form connections and to be around other people who are willing to talk about, yeah, I have trauma. I have relational trauma. Yeah. That's how we roll there, is we're real and we talk about what's actually going on, instead of, putting on a mask and saying I'm fine and everything's great in my life. So we're real, and we're going to be authentic as we courageously can. And it's a place to start practicing with people, getting access to these tools and learning about things like trauma. Okay. The next place, if you're a little more experienced and you actually resonate with this kind of interview and you want to help other people, for example, with their trauma, the relationship school's starting another round of training people to become relationship coaches. And because I was a former therapist who knows a lot about trauma and trained in several trauma modalities, I'm teaching people how to do that in year 2. So if you want to enroll, learn how to sit with people in year 1, and year 2 is about learning how to deal and work with trauma, learning how to work with couples, then you might take an interest in the relationship coaches training program, all right? Known as RC1, RC2, RC3. Right now we're doing RC1 and RC2. We have not started RC3 yet. So if you're interested in that, go to relationshipschool.net/apprentice, and you can learn. If you're a natural born helper, learn more about that. Okay, folks, great hanging out with you. Another good episode here, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. And make sure you check out the Smart Couple Quote Book. Take care.